Good evening, everyone. I think we're ready to go. We're going to get going right on time here, and because this webinar will likely be over 1 hour, so we're going to keep on track. Thank you all for joining us for today's webinar, Becoming a Winter Wildlife Detective. My name is Kayla Burak. I am the Engagement Manager in the Saskatchewan region for the Nature Conservancy of Canada, and I will be your moderator today. Hannah Shapesmeyer, the Conservation Volunteer Program Manager for the Alberta region, is also joining us and helping us make sure things run smooth. I'd just like to start by stating that we at the Nature Conservancy of Canada respectfully acknowledge that the work we do across the country is on traditional territories of many Indigenous nations and communities, past and present. For a millennia, they have worked to protect these landscapes and the life these areas sustain. I would like to thank these original caretakers and acknowledge the ongoing work and presence of Indigenous peoples in Canada today. The Nature Conservancy of Canada, NCC, is a national charity and Canada's leading not-for-profit private land conservation organization, working to protect our most important natural areas and the species they sustain. Since 1962, NCC and its partners have helped to protect 14 million hectares, or 35 million acres, coast to coast to coast. To learn more, you can visit our website at www.natureconservancy.ca. Today, we'll be joined by Joseph Letke, Senior Biologist at Fiera Consulting, and Jordan Bell, Citizen Science Coordinator with the Alberta Biodiversity Monitoring Institute. I'd like to thank our speakers for being with us today to talk about winter wildlife tracking and how it can contribute to citizen science. Before we begin the webinar, I'd like to quickly cover a few housekeeping notes. During the pandemic, we recommend that you follow your provincial guidelines. Fortunately, winter tracking is a fun winter activity that can be done safely, and you will be a part of a meaningful citizen science project. Today's webinar is being recorded. We will be sharing the link to the recording after the event, so keep an eye on your inboxes. We welcome you to revisit the content yourself and share it with colleagues, friends, and family. We also invite your comments and questions. You will notice a bar of icons at the bottom of your screen. Just click on the speech bubble to open the chat. If you think of a question for the speakers at any point, just type it in there and include who the question is for, and we'll answer them at the end of the webinar. We likely won't have time to go over all the questions, but we will invite you to connect with the speakers in our follow-up email tomorrow. At this time, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Joseph Letke. Joseph is a co-founder and senior biologist at Fiera Biological Consulting with over 25 years of experience working across Western Canada and the United States. Widely acknowledged as one of the most experienced wildlife trackers in Alberta, Joseph routinely uses his skills to document and monitor wildlife presence and habitat through tracking. Joseph relishes these tracking opportunities as he believes that humans are natural-born trackers, and he takes great joy in awakening the inner tracker in all workshop participants. The floor is yours, Joseph.
All right, how's that working? How's that working?
Not shared right now.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, I'm getting.
Looks good, Joseph. Just unmute yourself, Joseph. Sorry.
How's that?
Perfect. Looks great. Thank you, Joseph.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the introduction, Kayla, and thank you everybody for waiting as I fumble through the technology here. I want to take a quick minute to thank the Nature Conservancy of Canada for the invitation to do this webinar. it's really, I think, an amazing thing that they recognize the importance of tracking. It's, hundreds of thousands of year old art that has really tapered off in just the last 50 or 60 years or more. And it's for me, it's really an amazing way of strengthening and finding meaningful connection to nature. I also want to thank everyone else for tuning in tonight. It's amazing that you're interested in tracking, and I think that winter tracking especially is a really great way to get started into tracking in general. The first step to being a tracking detective is to recognize that every track tells a story, and to be curious enough to take the time to learn that story. And this is true whether the tracks occur in snow or in any other substrate like mud, sand, or even stone. So what is a track? Any trace that an organism leaves behind as evidence of its being there. So like an abandoned bird nest, or tooth marks on an acorn, or a bit of litter left by a careless hiker. All of these are tracks, and each of them tell a story. In this slide, this isn't my story. It's a picture of a cave painting from Chauvet, France. And so what's amazing about this picture to me, and the reason that I want to show it to you, is that an artist stood here 30,000 years ago and etched out these images of wildlife on a cave wall. And to me, this picture really shows the strong human connection to wildlife that we have, and that it goes back at least 30,000 years. It's obvious to me that the person who did this had an extreme reverence for wildlife, and also some intimate knowledge of it. The images are really seem really accurate. And when I look at this image, it begs the question: have we lost that connection to wildlife and nature? And I really believe that we don't, that we haven't lost that it's still in us, it's innate in us. And even people who think that we have lost it, or that don't appreciate nature, they don't understand how badly they need it. And we've put some things in our way to appreciate nature, the internet, and 9-to-5 jobs, and automobiles, and all these things really place barriers between us and nature. So it just takes a little extra work to get out to natural places, to enjoy them, and to engage our curiosity about wildlife and their habitats. And for me, it's that curiosity that's key. It's the time that I take to learn the stories that nature's telling me that I find the most rewarding in any part of my day. So I want to tell you another story, and this isn't my story either. This was in the media this fall. It's a track that was discovered in White Sands, New Mexico. Scientists recognized this as the footprint of a human being from about 12,000 years ago. And they knew that every track tells a story, and they wanted to learn what story this particular track told. In this single footprint, they could tell that it was made by a woman or a teenage boy just by the size. But the story doesn't end there, because the scientists knew to look beyond a single footprint. What they discovered was an out and back trackway that stretched about a mile in length. And they were able to see that a person was carrying something heavy on the outgoing tracks, and that they shifted its weight periodically from one side of the body to the other. They could see that in just the shape of the foot being strange on one side of the body for a period of time, and then that same oddity shifting to the other side of the body for another period, and back and forth as this trackway went out for nearly half a mile in one direction and then came back. So they could tell that the person was, they could also tell that the person was walking very fast. And this is just based on the length of the stride. And they estimated that this person was moving 12,000 years ago at about 7 kilometers an hour. That's pretty fast. That's almost a jog. And they were doing that in probably 4 inches of mud. So we have a story here of a person who walked out alone a long distance across a giant mudscape, carrying something, and they did it very, very fast. So as trackers or as track detectives, there's some questions that should pop into our mind. Is there anything more that these tracks can tell us? What I would really like to know is, well, was it a woman or was it a teenage boy? Is there anything in the tracks, if we look further, that might tell us the answer to that question? And what is it they were carrying, and why? And why were they in such a hurry? And most obviously, where the heck were they going? So I'm going to leave it there. The thing that has made White Sands National Monument, where those tracks were found, so special is that for a period of time between 10 and 13,000 years ago, it was a giant track trap. And a track trap is simply a place where animals will leave behind distinguishable tracks if they happen to walk there. A muddy riverbank makes a good track trap. A sandbox makes a good track trap. In the summer, when there's no snow around, I have places around the city where I always go because I know the soil is moist there and it's a good spot for picking up, for tracks to be left behind by the animals that walk there. So the amazing opportunity we have in Canada, where we get snow all winter, nearly 6 months of the year, is that snow turns the whole landscape into a giant track trap. And that's why we talk about winter tracking as something special. Snow allows us to easily follow tracks and learn more about the track maker. Winter tracking, or snow tracking is what I normally call it, however, is not without some challenges. The most challenging thing for beginners and professionals alike, and I've taught a lot of both, is that the story is often never in a single footprint. So your field guides often, just the way they're written, draw the reader into the details of a single footprint. And then when you go out snow tracking, you realize in most of these tracks, I can't see what I'm supposed to be looking for. So you can see the lack of detail. This is a really typical snow track in midwinter in Alberta and Saskatchewan. So your field guide might tell you to look for things like claws, to count toes, to assess the shape of the hooves or the heel pads, but none of these things are evident in this single print. This can be extremely frustrating for beginners and for professionals. So there's some tools that we take with us when we go snow tracking that help us narrow things down, and they're things that we don't need details. We don't need to see the details in an individual print to use. So the first tool in our Track Detectives toolkit that I want to show you is just to recognize where we're at in the world. There are about 500 mammal species that might make tracks in North America, but by recognizing that we're in Alberta or Saskatchewan in winter, that number drops down to less than 50. So we've effectively eliminated our number of suspects from 500 down to 50 just by asking that simple question: where are we at in the world? So your geographic location is a really powerful tool for focusing your attention on the species that are likely to make tracks in your area. And you can narrow or refine your list of suspects even more by being more precise in your location. So if you're in the mountains of Alberta, there are species whose tracks you are very unlikely to encounter. Things like pronghorn or swift fox are unlikely to be in the Alberta mountains. However, if you're in Grasslands National Park in Saskatchewan, you might expect to encounter pronghorn or swift fox tracks, but not things like mountain goat or bighorn sheep. So whenever you're tracking, it's a good idea to do a little bit of homework ahead of time, to have a list of suspects you expect to encounter. This doesn't necessarily mean carrying a list if you're fairly advanced in your knowledge of wildlife. But if you're a beginner and starting out on your wildlife career or your wildlife interest, it might be a good idea to actually carry that list. And the lists that I use are basically 3 lists. There's things that I'm expecting to encounter, and there's things that I might possibly encounter, and then there's those things that are improbable. I'm really unlikely to encounter. And the Sasquatch image there, if you can see it, that's a joke. I'm not really expecting to see a Sasquatch, even improbably. But I keep an open mind. So I like to one of the things that I've started to do recently is go to other places to learn about animals that I'm not used to seeing or don't have a lot of knowledge of. So this is the same thing I do in those cases. So I do my homework ahead of time. I do my research. I figure out what species that I might expect to be in the area that I'm going to be visiting. And I'm also create a list of species that I'd really, really like to bump into, but I'm probably not expecting to. But if I do bump into them, I want to be able to recognize their tracks. And it's the same thing for the improbable ones. You might think, if there's something that I'm never going to see in my lifetime, why would I want to learn about its tracks? But it's important to study those kinds of animal tracks because you want to recognize them when you do see them. And so the homework I'm talking about is really widely available on the internet, just doing research about animals. I like books, so I have a lot of books that I can refer to do my homework ahead of time. So that's about all I'm going to say about that tool. Something I like to get beginners to do whenever we encounter a track is to ask the question, is it big? So this is the second major track detective tool of deduction. Is it big? It's a really easy question to ask, and it's a pretty easy question to answer with a little bit of practice. And it's really important because although assessing size takes some practice, you can really use it easily to narrow down your list of suspects again. So we had a list of 500 species. We narrowed it down to 50 by saying we were in Alberta or Saskatchewan. And now we look at the track and we see that it's big. There's a limited number of big animals that are in Alberta and Saskatchewan. So now we're maybe looking at 10 possible suspects. So we've gone from 500 to 50 down to 10. So those are really, really powerful and easy to use tools that get you close. And it's much better than starting at the beginning of a field guide and flipping through each page trying to find the track that matches what you're seeing on the ground. So I said, is it big? So one of the things about big is that there's different ways of assessing big. In this slide, we see that the cat species that we might be expected to find tracks of in Western Canada. Most of us would know that of these cats, the cougar is the largest. But lots of people are surprised to learn that cougar don't have the biggest feet and therefore don't necessarily make the biggest tracks. The Canada lynx has adapted to stay up on top of the snow. So these snowshoe-like feet can make really big tracks. And in fact, the largest lynx tracks are larger than the largest cougar tracks. So that surprises a lot of people, especially when you look at this diagram and see that how much bigger the cougar is than the lynx. Typically, big feet equal big tracks, so you can count on that. So when you're assessing the size of animal tracks, it's important to also consider the animal's weight. So lynx and cougar have really similar sized tracks, but they're really different. They have really different weights. So a cougar weighs literally 10 times as much as a lynx. That's a lot. So where a lynx might weigh 20 to 30 pounds, cougar can weigh up to 200 pounds. And so that difference in weight is going to show up in the tracks, even though their tracks might their feet might look quite similar and they might be the same size. And so a good tracker knows the relative weights of these animals and can use that as one of the criteria it uses for solving the mystery of who made tracks. Likewise, the bobcat and the house cat here, a lot of people worry about mistaking bobcat tracks for lynx tracks or lynx tracks for bobcats, but there's really no comparison. The bobcat tracks are very small and you're more likely to confuse them with a house cat. They're that small. So they're only about, where a house cat's tracks are about 3 centimeters wide, a bobcat's tracks are about 4 centimeters wide. Another thing that I like to teach beginners is to always look at your own tracks and what they look like in snow. So we're a big animal. When we have big feet, we make big tracks. And so if you look back at the way that your tracks look in the snow and compare that to the animal you're looking at, that's another way of getting an idea of whether this is a big animal or a small animal. It's also really important for assessing snow conditions, because a track made by an animal one day will look different if it makes a track in the same place but in different snow conditions. So soft, wet snow, fluffy powder, all of those things. But you can get a sense for what its track should look like if you look at what your own tracks are doing. So when I start to go out on a tracking walk, and I start walking through deep snow, I look back and I see, oh, that's what my tracks look like today. That gives me an idea of what the snow conditions are. I kind of know what the tracks made by snowshoe hare are going to look like today, because I have an understanding for those snow conditions. So that takes some time, but it's a good thing to practice. So the last tool I'm going to show you today in the Track Detectives Toolkit is to ask the question and be able to answer, how is the animal moving? And this is a really important one. It's the most technical one we're going to talk about today. So all animals have a preferred gait, and by gait I just mean a way of moving. For example, the preferred method of getting around for humans is walking. That is when they're going through the woods and they're not taking an Uber somewhere. When we're going through the woods, we like to walk. We can also run, but running takes up a lot more energy, and we tend to only run for particular purposes. In deep snow, we probably don't run much at all because it just takes too much energy. So our preferred gait is to walk. And if you do see a human running through snow, there's probably some sort of external stimulus that caused that. It's the same for animals. So they all have a preferred way of moving through snow. And unless they're being chased or they're doing some chasing, they don't really deviate from that very much. So if we can recognize those gaits and we know which animals use those gaits, then we have another tool that can help us understand what animal made the tracks. So let's talk about track patterns and gaits. These are 3 simple track patterns that anyone can learn to recognize. They're the alternating track pattern on the left, the 2-print track pattern in the middle, and the 4-print track pattern on the right. Most animals, when moving, will do one of these 3 track patterns. An alternating track pattern is made by the gaits, a walking gait or a trotting gait. Those are the 2 primary ways of moving that make this alternating pattern. A 2-print pattern, the most common way of making a 2-print pattern is a gait that's called a 2x2 lope. And the most common way of making a 4-print pattern as your preferred gait is the bounding gait. So there are other gaits that will make a 4-print pattern, but they're never used as a preferred gait. So a walking gait leaves an alternating track pattern. The footprints alternate from one side of the midline to the other side. So left, right, left, right. So you can see in the diagram below the GIF that I've got a circle on the bottom on the right. That's supposed to represent a footprint. And then a left across the midline, right across the midline, left across the midline. So it's that left, right pattern. And we should really be able to recognize that quite easily because it's the same pattern that we make when we walk through snow. And I should also mention that that animals that walk in snow will typically, their hind feet will land directly in their front feet. And we call that a direct register. That doesn't really matter. What matters is that we only get one footprint where there's actually two footfalls. So in each of those circles that are representing footprints, the front foot has landed and then moved on, and the hind foot has landed in exactly the same place. And this is the typical gait for human beings, for all the deer family, and for all the cat family. So when you see this gait and you recognize it as that there's no reason why this animal might choose to use this gait that you can see, so it's not like being forced into this gait somehow. So for an example of being forced into a walking gait when you normally do something else might be going up a really steep hill. So if you don't see anything like that, it makes sense that this is just the normal baseline for the animal that made this track. Then you can assume that it's one of those things. It's either a human being, a deer, or a cat. There are some other animals, some smaller things that I haven't put in here that also make a walking pattern, but for now, let's just leave it at that. And here's an example of a walking track pattern in actual snow. So hopefully you can see the track pattern going from the bottom of the screen across the top, and you can see that right, left, right, left, right, left pattern as it goes. And you can see that it's quite a wide track. So I should, I don't know if I can back up here. In the previous image, you noticed that there was a gap between the footprints and the midline. So the track was quite wide, the overall track pattern. And I've just added some animation here to show that that's not the only tracks in the picture. So there's a very old one that's been snowed in, and we can see that it actually has the very same track pattern, and it actually has about the very same distance between each of its tracks. It might even be the same species, and we can see that. We could hypothesize that it's the same species simply based on those similarities. So another alternating track pattern. It's very much like the walk. This is the trotting track pattern. And the real difference between a walk and a trot is that narrowness of track width. So you can see on the diagram below the GIF that there's an arrow there indicating the trail width. That trail width is really, really narrow with a trotting track pattern. And this is the preferred gait of all the dog family. So if they're not trotting, they're probably feeding or sleeping. Whenever they go anywhere, they're usually using this trot. And they can actually trot so slow that if you're watching them, it might even look like a walk. But this is the way that they move. And it creates that really narrow track width. So you can see the important thing to see here is that those prints in the diagram are actually overlapping that midline. In the walk, there was a gap between those tracks and the midline. But with the trot, it's actually, the trail width is so narrow that it's overlapping that midline. Hopefully that makes sense. So if you see a trotting track pattern, you know right away you're dealing with the dog family. And here's what it looks like in the field. This was, well, it doesn't matter where it was. It's out on a lake somewhere. So this is a red fox track. And hopefully you can look down that and you can see that alternating track pattern. You can recognize it, but you can also acknowledge that it's quite subtle. So you have to sort of, when you're in the field, you really do have to kind of get on the track and look down it to assess whether it has that left, right pattern, if it's alternating or not. Now, the third track pattern I want to talk about is this two-print pattern. And the gait we're going to study that makes a two-print pattern is something called a 2x2 lope. Now, 2x2 lope is the preferred gait of all the weasel family, with some exceptions. So things that don't so often use a 2x2 lope that I've left off that list would be badger and striped skunk. They have slightly different kind of loping gaits. And actually the badger actually can walk and trot. So so this is a 2x2 loping gait. So it has a consistent characteristic of the two prints together, a gap, two prints together, a gap, and those gaps between the two prints are can vary in distance apart. If you think back to the trotting gait and the walking gait, the distance between each of those footprints in the diagram was more or less equal, and that's really true. That's one of the things that make it walking and trotting gait, is that consistent distance between between each footfall, as opposed to this gait where the distance between each of the tracks can vary a little bit. So you had two prints, a gap, two prints, a gap which might be shorter or smaller, two prints and a gap, and those prints tend in the weasel family tend to always have an angle to them like this. And the reason I mention that is that that's really what makes what you can use to identify this as a 2x2 lope, as opposed to some of the other two print track patterns that you might bump into that we're not going to talk about today. And these are so these are all tracks made by a short-tailed weasel, and they're all made using that 2x2 lope pattern. And so this one on the left is just a close-up of the of one of the prints, and so it's important to remember that there are actually 4 feet represented in that print. So the front feet landed and then pushed off just as the hind feet landed right in their place. And so, so we call that a full rotation, and that just means that all 4 feet are represented in that little tiny track. And if we look over to the middle of the screen, I'm showing this one really because it's a classic weasel print. If you are track, you look in a field guide, there will probably be an image of this track pattern, and there will probably or a diagram of it. In reality, this is a phenomenon that happens with weasel tracks that really only shows up in particular snow types. So more frequently, you're going to see what's on the far right, which is just those isolated 2 prints and a gap, and 2 prints and a gap. So one more. This is probably my favorite. It's the most fun, and it's the one, and it's one that that when you go outside tomorrow, you're probably going to be able to find. This is a 4-print pattern, and it's essentially two front feet land, and they land quite close together near the midline, and the hind feet come around and pass the front feet before they hit the ground. And so it makes this this pattern, and I've provided 2 patterns here. And this is just so you can, it's a clue, the different way that these bounds look, that will help tell some animals apart. So the The bound in the middle of the screen is kind of typical of the rabbits and the ground-dwelling squirrels. So the front feet, one front foot is a little further ahead of the other front foot, but the hind feet swing around and land parallel to one another, and then they push off simultaneously. And then in the other track, that's more typical of the tree squirrels. So the front feet tend to land, not all the time, but they tend to land in an even alignment, and then the hind feet swing around and land ahead of where the front feet landed. Well, this is what it looks like. So hopefully this begins to make some sense. So the front feet land, hind feet swing around and land, front feet, hind feet. So the front feet land first, hind feet swing past and land ahead of them. And so hopefully you can see that in the track pattern. One thing to note, because the hind feet have to swing around the front feet, animals making a bounding pattern tend to have a wider track pattern than animals doing a 2x2 lope. And the reason I mention that is that sometimes the front feet don't register because there's a crust on the snow or something like that. And so then the hind feet come around and they do register. And so essentially the front feet are invisible and all you can see is the hind feet. And so you wonder what did that? And one of the clues that I look for is just that width. If I am thinking that this is, if I'm thinking that it might be a weasel track, but it's too wide, then I might think that maybe this is a red squirrel where the front feet aren't registering. And then the other thing I would look for is that that angle, because the weasels are almost always have that one foot slightly ahead of the other. Hope that makes some sense. And then here we have just those same track patterns and look at the wildlife that make them. So again, just the snowshoe hare, typical 4-print pattern of the snowshoe hare, and then in the middle, the typical 4-print pattern of a deer mouse. So they're bounders as well. And with the deer mice, you sometimes see the tail, not always. And then the red squirrel. And again, 4-print pattern for the snowshoe hare, my diagram comparing it to one taken in the field. Same thing with the mouse in the middle, my diagram comparing it with a picture taken in the field. And note that in the field, in this particular instance, the tail has not registered. And then hopefully you can see the squirrel on the right. You can see that in that image, the front feet, one is slightly ahead of the other, but they're pretty squared, pretty even. So now here's my species list organized by their preferred gait. So let's see how much time we've got here. Okay, so in the deer family, if you're seeing a walk and you're thinking that it might be a cat or a deer, it's pretty easy to tell a cat track from a deer track, even if they're a big cat and maybe a small ungulate. One of the ways to tell is just the cat tracks, except for lynx, all the other cats, they have naked feet, so there's no hair on the bottom of their feet, and they step really carefully. So they tend to make a very clean track, and you can usually see some detail. So you have a good opportunity to see the heel pad and the toe pads. And so if you can see that, you know it's not an ungulate or a member of the deer family. Likewise, with the deer family, the deer have very sharp and hard feet, and they tend to drag their feet a little bit. The cats are less likely to drag their feet. And when they do drag their feet, when the deer drag their feet, you can see that hardness and sharpness in their feet in the drag marks. And the cat, has really, really soft feet, and it sort of brushes with kind of the furry part of the top of their paw. And it makes, as you would expect, a very soft, round, soft-edged mark in the snow. So that's one. Those are some ways. And then the deer family also have dew claws that you can look for. So those are little tiny hooved toes that are kind of where their wrist or their ankle would be, and when they're stepping in deep snow, those tend to register, and you can look for those. The dog family, just telling the difference between the dog family, so some of them are easy. So a wolf is huge. So the only thing you're likely to confuse a wolf track for is maybe a big domestic dog. And so one thing I tell students about a domestic dog is that we know domestic dog, like we know them, they're our friends. So we have a really good understanding, even if you're not a wildlife biologist or studying wildlife behavior, you probably understand dog behavior pretty well. And so that behavior shows up in the tracks. The tracks are messy. They're going in and out, and remember, out of the woods and coming back and going all over the place, and lots of turns for no reason and all of that kind of stuff. And then remember, we talked about the preferred gait. That preferred gait for the dog family kind of falls apart with a domestic dog because they're not so worried about conserving energy, right? They know they're going home to a bowl of kibble, plus they've been cooped up in their kennel or in the house all day or whatever. When they go for a walk, they're going to make some tracks, and there's going to be a lot of foreprint tracks. So that's but not bounds, but actually like gallops are another foreprint track. Anyway, it's sometimes you just have to know the animal to be able to tell the difference, and just the behavior you can see in the tracks is a good clue. Between red fox and coyote, that's probably one of the trickiest ones that even professionals have a tough time with. Even in a clear track with a lot of detail, it can be really tricky. They're very similar in size. One thing to look for is the red fox track is much rounder than a coyote track, where a coyote track is about, a print is about 4 to 5 centimeters long or wide, and it's about 5 to 6 centimeters long, that sort of thing. So it's slightly oval shaped, and the red fox tends to be round. Another thing to look for, you'll find all of this stuff in your field guide, so I'm just touching on the surface. But once the trick is, once you get it down to these few suspects, the answers are there for you in the field guide, and it's easy to find. The other thing about coyote and red fox is just the red fox tends to have even a narrower trail width than a coyote. Over in the weasel family, the difference between all of these species, really it's a matter of scale. Weasel are very, very small, and so you shouldn't be getting them confused with anything else. Mink and marten are really close in size, but if you know mink, you know that they're aquatic. They're really, really heavy, and they're not designed to stay up on the snow the way that a marten is, and that difference shows up in the tracks. Fisher and marten are also really difficult to tell apart. They're really similar in size. They're really similar in their habitats and the things that they do. Their feet are both really heavily furred, so none of the detail sort of shows up. So they can be tricky. One of the tricks I teach my students is that although they're really similar, Fisher are heavier than marten, and so you look for that to help you tell the difference. And then the other thing is that Fisher are bigger, so the biggest Fisher are bigger than the biggest marten. So if you have a Fisher whose foot is more than 7 centimeters wide, or if you have a Fisher or marten sized animal that its one foot is more than 7 centimeters wide, it's definitely a Fisher. Wolverine, you shouldn't get mixed up. If you find one, you should be excited and taking lots of pictures. if you were to mix it up, it might be with the river otter, which has a similar sort of gait and sometimes, and a similar sized foot. And the river otter is also heavier than you would think. So they're quite similar. So that might be a tricky one. But river otter has a really special way of moving around that you can watch for. And I might show you a GIF of that at the end of the talk here if I've got time. So let's just look at some tracks here. So, and let's see. So walk through this process that I've been talking about. So where are we at in the world? Let's say this is in Lloydminster, and we need to assess whether it's big or small. Hopefully you guys can all get a sense for the size of this animal as being quite large, but it's hard to tell from a picture without any reference in the picture. So that's a lesson for you when you're taking pictures of wildlife tracks. It's nice to have something in the picture that you can sort of gauge the relative size of things with. If we were there, in the picture with the track, we would be able to see that, yeah, it's quite large, and we could compare how far it's sinking into the snow with how far we're sinking into the snow. We could look at that stride length, which is a really good indication of size in a walking gait. And then that's the other key. Do we recognize this as a walking gait? So hopefully you can all see that alternating track pattern. And then if you do identify it as an alternating track pattern, is it a trot or is it a walk? And remember that trot has a really narrow trail width, and this trail width is quite wide. Let's look at something else. So the location of this is in Edmonton or Saskatoon, if that suits you better. Is it big? Well, I would say that there's some evidence here that we might be able to see in the photo that suggests that it's not big, because it's just not sinking very far into the snow. And this looks like fairly deep snow. That's a bit subjective. But let's say that it's not big. So then how is it moving? Hopefully you can all recognize that bounding pattern by now, because I've dwelled on it quite a bit. And you can see where the front feet have landed and the hind feet have swung around and landed parallel to one another. So that's a pretty typical bound. This is a jackrabbit. Did I mention that the last photo was an elk? I should have mentioned that. That was an elk on a frozen creek. Now this one is a little bit different. So this is probably something that would occur in Jasper National Park or maybe Prince Albert National Park, just to give you an idea. And it is, it's not big. So it's fairly small in size. It's not sinking very deeply into the snow. Now, hopefully you can see that each of those paired tracks are, one foot is ahead of the other. So they're offset at an angle. And that's your clue that this is a 2x2 lope of something. This happens to be a marten track. And finally, I just want to show you this one. So we saw this already, but this is, we could say that this is in Elk Island National Park, because that's where I took the photo. And we'll say that it is not big, although maybe it's somewhere in between. If we look down this track, I hope everyone can see that alternating pattern and recognize, oh yeah, this is an alternating trail pattern. And that you can see then, oh, its trail width is really, really narrow. And that means that this is probably a trot. And who are the trotting animals? The dog family. So this is a dog, this is a red fox on one of the lakes in Elk Island National Park. So excelling requires doing, and that's really true with tracking. I can't teach you to be an expert tracker in 45 minutes or an hour. I would like to, but it's not possible. When I'm teaching professionals, it's a 2 full day course, and even then, I warn them, I can't make you an expert in 2 days. You really get better after having some formal knowledge and then going out and doing some tracking and getting some experience and making some mistakes, but really collecting stories for the most part. It's those stories, they don't go away, they stay with you, and they become knowledge the next time you see something similar. So you have to really collect those. I like to carry a journal with me when I'm tracking, and so it's really often it's full of questions. So I might encounter something I've never seen before, and so I'll jot that down, and then when I get home, I do some research and learn some more about it. So I suggest doing that. I also use it for sketching tracks and sketching weird track patterns. I also keep species lists just for my own entertainment, that sort of thing. Experience-wise, there's lots of ways to get experience. So you can go out on your own, and I'm an advocate for going out on my own. And one of the reasons I like to go out on my own and get more tracking experience is that when I'm alone, I can take as much time as I need, and I'm not worried about my field partner or my companion getting cold feet or not being as into tracks as I am. And so when I find a mystery and I'm alone, I'm more likely to follow it to its end and figure it out, as opposed to when I'm with someone else. But my other bit of advice is go tracking with someone else, because they see things that you don't see, and that's really helpful. And they probably know things that you don't know. And so 2 trackers are better than 1. There's kind of a joke among trackers: if you always go tracking alone, then you're always right. And that's kind of true, because there's no one there to question you or to challenge you on things. So the other thing is that as your growth as a tracker, as you get experience and you've had a little bit of formal training, you'll start to gain a lot of confidence, and that's great. Confidence is good, but you need to have humility as well, because like I mentioned before, someone always knows something that you don't know, and you will always find something tricky or be tricked by something. And it's really important to keep an open mind to other possibilities. I mean, my whole approach to tracking is to see as much as I can with as little effort as possible at first, and formulate a hypothesis. So I see a track in the snow, I look up, I look down the track, and I form a hypothesis as to what it is. And then I investigate further to try to find evidence to either support my hypotheses or contradict it. And if I find evidence that contradicts it, no problem. I just formulate a new hypothesis and I keep going. And that's how I solve mysteries. And then if you've done that enough times and you've experienced some humility, that's really when competence kicks in and you become an expert tracker. It's a long road. So I hope that some of you are beginning your journey to that. Before I finish up, I just want to take you back to White Sands National Monument, where we started out, just for a few minutes, because there were some unanswered questions in that story that I told. Remember, we were wondering where the heck that person was going as they went across that mudscape, and we were wondering why the heck were they in such a hurry? And I'm really curious about, is it or is it not a woman, or is it a teenage boy? I hope there's some evidence in there that might give us a clue. And what the heck were they carrying? So scientists didn't give up either. They followed the tracks for the entire length, hoping to learn the answers to those questions. And what they discovered were periodic places where much smaller human tracks appeared beside the larger human tracks. So this was a small child. This was the weight the person was shifting from arm to arm. They were carrying a toddler. And every once in a while, they had to stop and set the child down to rest a little bit and let the child walk beside them. And then they'd pick them back up and they'd keep going at that blistering pace of 7 kilometers an hour through mud. the small child supports the hypothesis that this was a woman rather than a teenage boy. That just makes reasonable sense, that the likelihood of someone carrying a small child is that it was a woman rather than a teenage boy. And the presence of the child also shed some light on where the woman might have been going, because scientists speculate that, or scientists understand that actually she didn't return with the child. So that's evident in her tracks. There's no child's tracks beside her tracks on the way back. And she's not shifting weight from one foot to the other. So the hypothesis is that she delivered the child to some sort of caretaker or a family member in another settlement. And we may never know for sure that that was the case, but it seems like a credible hypothesis. They also discovered why the woman might have been moving so quickly, because the tracks of mastodon and something called a giant ground sloth cross over top of her outgoing tracks, and then her tracks cross over the mastodon and the giant sloth tracks when she returned. So in the couple of hours that they think that she was gone, and they know that because of a difference in the way the mud had dried between her outgoing trip and her return trip, a mastodon and a giant sloth crossed her tracks. That's pretty cool. And this is a giant ground sloth image, by the way. So that's a pretty good indication right there of why she was in such a hurry to get across that open space. The giant sloth tracks actually stop at her tracks, and the tracks show that it raised up on its hind legs as if to try and catch some scent, possibly that woman's scent, and maybe even catch sight of her walking away in the distance. All of that from 12,000 years ago because of tracks. That's a pretty amazing mystery, and I hope you don't mind me taking the time to share it with you. And I just want to say that when we go outside tomorrow or next week, if we take with us the sense of curiosity, our sense of curiosity, and we ask the right questions, and then look for possible answer to those questions, we can find our own amazing stories, just as amazing possibly as the White Sands National Monument story. And that's the end of my presentation. If you are interested in learning more, we offer some courses, and I've provided some information to Kayla and Hannah. Yeah, so hopefully there's some time for questions. As soon as I figure out how to do it, I'm going to stop share.
Thank you so much, Joseph. And we really appreciate you doing this for us online. We know this isn't typically how you would deliver a tracking workshop, but for experts like you to be able to curate this virtually for us, this year is a really great opportunity for us. So thank you. We appreciate you sharing your expertise and experiences around winter wildlife tracking. And I know I'm excited to get out there with my family this winter. So thank you. And I am keeping track of everyone's questions, so keep throwing them out there. And we can ask Jordan and Joseph some questions at the end. So our next speaker today is Jordan Bell. Jordan is the Citizen Science Coordinator at the Alberta Biodiversity Monitoring Institute, a not-for-profit organization that monitors biodiversity all across Alberta. For the past 2.5 years, Jordan has managed their citizen science application, NatureLinks. He is also involved in other community-based monitoring initiatives. So I will let you take it away, Jordan.
Awesome, cool. Well, thank you so much, Kayla and Hannah, for having me here, and for everybody tuning in and being super active on the chat. Joseph, that was a fantastic presentation, and I'm sure everyone is sort of chomping at the bit to ask you some more follow-up questions and things like that. So I will try to make sure I'm respectful of our time this evening, and that I won't keep people too long from that opportunity to ask some questions. So I'll just give my screen set up here to present. But really what I'm hoping to sort of share with all of you today in this you know, discussion about winter tracking and some of the considerations of how to become a winter wildlife detective and how to get out there and some of the winter wildlife detectives toolkit that Joseph had mentioned earlier. I'm hoping that you know, we can sort of share this idea of citizen science as not only an opportunity to kind of bring our tracking to maybe the next level, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, but also to consider citizen science as a piece of that toolkit for a winter wildlife detective. I'm certain Joseph is going to share some resources that are going to help some of you explore winter tracking a little bit more, some guidebooks and internet resources and things like that. And hopefully we can explore citizen science as another piece of that puzzle in, as you grow and build experience and work towards competence and greater confidence in this field. But I do think, you know, given Joseph's experience and his wealth of knowledge, it's worth taking a few moments just to explain who I am and why I am presenting here for you tonight. So as Kayla mentioned, I work for a not-for-profit biodiversity monitoring project here in Alberta, known as the ABMI. And what we essentially do is we monitor Alberta's species and their habitats across the province. And we do this in a number of ways, but we really built our brand, so to speak, on this image here on the right. And this is essentially a systematic grid of surveying locations that are all spaced 20 kilometers apart from each other. And essentially our program was designed on visiting each of these locations on a 7 to 10 year rotation. And this would allow us to get a really good understanding of like what's going on within the province. And we survey a variety of different taxa and do a number of different protocols. And we hope that over time we can build this baseline understanding of what's going on in the province and then slowly detect changes as they might be occurring on the landscape. And, you know, we've been doing this for the past decade, and it has allowed us to gather a wealth of knowledge provincially. But what we realized is that, you know, while conducting this massive survey, we were only actually surveying about 5% of Alberta's landmass. And so we realized that there was an opportunity there to actually start to survey in between the dots of the grid. And we saw citizen science as an opportunity, given the number of people that are out on the landscape, making observations and the wealth of knowledge that exists within our community. In addition to that, you know, we felt that we did have some things to offer and we wanted to sort of give back to that community. You know, we have a wealth of taxonomic expertise to share with folks and help educate and foster an appreciation for the species in our province. We have a decade of experiencing of managing and reporting on biodiversity in the province. And we also have a commitment to open data. So we make sure that everything that we collect is available to anyone who is interested. And we felt that we could positively contribute by exploring citizen science and allowing the community to access some of this information. So what we did is we developed Nature Links, which is a smartphone app that basically allows people to submit photo records of biodiversity throughout the province. So anyone can participate by simply downloading the app onto their phone, and they can take pictures of birds and plants and mammals and upload them to this platform, where they will then, these sightings will then be verified by a community of species experts and taxonomists that are active on the app. So this is an opportunity for people to share their observations but also connect with the community and learn a little bit about some of the species they might be seeing in their backyard. And so all of this kind of brought me here today to sort of talk about what citizen science can bring to your journey in becoming a winter wildlife detective, and how it can kind of play a role in building that experience, and then also kind of bringing your winter tracking to the next level by contributing to scientific research and sharing those observations beyond you know, your individual journeys. So if you're not familiar, it's probably worthwhile to just kind of touch base on what citizen science is, just to make sure we're all on the same page. I'm sure a number of you have participated in citizen science knowingly or unknowingly, and you know, we might all have slightly differing understandings of what it means to be a citizen scientist or to participate in citizen science. But for us, you know, citizen science typically refers to these research collaborations between scientists and volunteers. And particularly, this is mostly to expand opportunities for scientific data collection and to provide access to science information. So sort of, as I explained earlier, to use the ABMI as an example, we had this provincial monitoring program, but we did see an opportunity to work with the community here in Alberta and expand our opportunities to collect more data, but also to share more information with members of the public. And within this, oh, and I should mention that, you know, beyond this definition, citizen science has grown to become so much more. By engaging with different folks and engaging with volunteers and scientists, we're able to foster a greater appreciation for our natural environment, kind of promote curiosity as we encourage folks to get outside and ask questions. And really, we can kind of start to build and create communities of like-minded individuals. And we'll talk sort of about how we can do this, mostly through the advent of technology, to be quite honest. Now, there's two types of citizen science projects. They can mostly be kind of understood by using this diagram here. So we can have citizen science projects that are contributory. And so this means that they're led by researchers mostly, and with volunteer contributions. So again, using the ABMI as an example, we might have a research project where we're in need of collecting more data, and we'll reach out to the greater community to sort of help answer that question. And this could be seen as sort of a top-down approach to designing a citizen science project. And on the other end, we have more collaborative projects. And so these are shaped by participants or communities themselves and are guided really by that community need, where then they will reach out to scientists or researchers to sort of help them build a project to collect the data that is of interest to them and answer their questions. Now, citizen science has a very long history of people participating and sharing information and contributing to research. And the roots of citizen science actually date back to the 1800s with ornithologists and early naturalists keeping records of bird migrations within North America. And over time, thanks to advancements in technology, this field has really grown and evolved, and now there are a wealth of citizen science projects and apps out there, making it even easier to participate. A few examples, you know, would be biodiversity monitoring apps like iNaturalist, which are available internationally and have collected millions of observations of species throughout the globe. We have species-specific projects like eBird that allow people to submit lists of birds that they are observing on their walks. We have apps like Zooniverse, which are computer-based platforms that allow you to actually go in and participate in a variety of different online projects, from identifying galaxies to helping to tag and process images of wildlife from trail camera images. And probably a very classic example that many of you are familiar with would be the Christmas bird count. Now, this is a great example of a citizen science initiative where naturalists and birders can get out and share their observations of birds during the Christmas season. And a really great resource if you're interested in exploring the wealth of projects that exist out there would be this resource called SciStarter. And this is basically a database of active citizen science projects that you can search and query and kind of look for your specific interests and find a project that may be relevant to where you live or a topic of interest. So with an understanding of citizen science kind of behind us, let's talk about citizen science and winter tracking. So as I had mentioned, from a tracking perspective, citizen science really provides quite a few opportunities. Mainly, I like to think of citizen science as an opportunity to sort of bring your tracking to the next level by sharing your observations with different monitoring projects or making sure your observations are available to biologists like Joseph and other academics or researchers. Also, given the emphasis on learning and sort of promoting some curiosity, citizen science can also be a great opportunity to learn more from a community of like-minded individuals. Many apps like iNaturalist have communities of users or species experts who can actually help you ID tricky or uncertain tracks that you might come across. But there are a couple things to consider when tracking with the citizen science perspective. And I think probably many of these could be answered by asking this simple question: what would Jason do? So when submitting tracks, we need to ask ourselves, we need to think like an expert and we need to act like an expert. So we have to think, what do we need to share that someone can ID, so that someone can ID the tracks from photos and essentially validate some of the observations we might be making. And a lot of this comes down to taking good photo-based observations. This can be done by ensuring that your photos are of high quality and are in focus. Having a scale of reference is very important. So you might have noticed that in many of the tracking images we saw earlier, there was always some sort of scale to ensure that we were able to understand the size of the print or the track that we were looking at. We want to make sure that we have a photo of the print as well as an understanding of the gait. All things that we've learned are very important when tracking. And we also want to make sure that we have a photo of not only one print, but maybe a couple, because it can be very common to submit the track that most likely supports our hypothesis. And this can be, as was sort of alluded to earlier, this might support the joke that if you always track by yourself, you will always be correct. And if you always submit a print that supports your own hypothesis, it can be quite difficult to disprove that. We also want to make sure that we're keeping track of the weather. So if we're going out after recent snowfalls, this will really help ensure that we're getting an accurate representation of when that animal might have been traveling across the landscape. As tracks get older, it can be a little bit difficult. It can be more difficult to identify these tracks as well. And we also want to make note of any other relevant field observations. So a lot of apps like iNaturalist and our app NatureLinks allows you to actually plug in any notes that might be relevant to someone who might be trying to help you identify these sightings. And really, when it comes down to citizen science and winter tracking, to use quotes from our earlier presentation, excelling really requires doing. And mostly, we could see citizen science as an opportunity to help us get out there, help us share some of our observations, and help us learn from a community that might be active on some of these citizen science platforms. So I encourage you to sort of get out there and start tracking, taking some photographs, and if the opportunity presents itself, contributing them to a citizen science project. And I might do a little bit of a shameless plug here, but if you are looking to take your tracking to the next level with citizen science, for those of you in Alberta, you can join us and the NCC for a winter tracking mission that we will be hosting later in January, that I'm sure Hannah and Kayla will be speaking to a little bit more and providing some more info. But just something to kind of mark in your calendars if you are keen to start tracking and contribute to some citizen science here in Alberta. So a bit of a blitz overview of citizen science and winter tracking, but I hope this was sort of interesting and helpful, and hopefully we have some time for some questions to learn a little bit more. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jordan. We're so grateful to have you have had you here this evening and to inspire and motivate us and give us new ideas about how we can contribute to citizen science in the winter. It's honestly not something that I have even thought about doing in the winter. So I'm going to just throw up my screen here, and then I have written down some questions that I am going to go through as well here for both of you. All right. So if you do still have questions for the speakers, do feel free to still type them in, and we'll get through as many as we can. We'll go right to 8 o'clock as we advertised, 8 o'clock in Saskatchewan, 7 in Alberta. So just type questions in there, and anything we don't get through, we will be sharing resources and email addresses for the presenters in our follow-up email. So do feel free to get in touch with them if you have any important follow-up questions. All right, so there were a bunch of questions about recommended field guides and resources, which we will be touching on in our follow-up email. We had a question early on for Joseph about what a beaver track and pattern and gait looks like.
Yeah, so am I on?
Yes.
So beaver is a good one. So that's one of those species that are probably not on your expected list in the wintertime, but definitely a possibility. And I've encountered many beaver tracks over the years. It's a walking gait, but a beaver is quite low to the ground. And so in any amount of snow, you're going to see some body drag, and you'll definitely see some tail drag, and it's very difficult sometimes to get a good picture of a beaver footprint because that tail makes a mess of their track pattern. I have a few photos of beaver tracks in snow. One thing, a beaver's a rodent, and rodents have a common sort of foot structure. So they tend to have, or they have 4 toes on their front feet and 5 on the back. It's a little bit different with a beaver because they have a really sort of short vestigial kind of thumb that can register on their front hand as well. So sometimes you'll see 5. They have claws. Hind feet are much bigger than the front feet. And of course the hind feet are really webbed, and that webbing often shows up. If you're going to mistake a beaver for something, it'll probably be a goose because often only 3 of its toes show up, and so you've got those 3 toes and those webbed feet, and it's about Canada goose-sized hind foot. I hope that was helpful. Also a little bit pigeon-toed.
Oh, there you go. Thanks, Joseph. Another question for you while we're at it here. Fairly early in your presentation, you had a picture of elk tracks, and someone asked how you knew it was an elk and not a moose or a large deer.
Right. So if you have clear prints, the difference is fairly simple to find in any of your field guides. So the hoof prints are different shapes. So a moose prints are quite large relative to an elk, and they're really, really pointy. And an elk hoof is more rounded at the front, and the front of the hoof of both sides of the hoof come really close together usually. So it's kind of heart-shaped and less arrowhead-shaped like a moose is. And then a big deer, same thing. The deer has a very moose-like shape to its foot, but it's much, much smaller than a moose, and usually much smaller than what you'd expect an elk to be. If you don't have clear prints, I'm going to teach you a secret, and that is an animal that walks, its stride length, so that is not 1 foot to the next, but for example, the left foot to the next time the left foot lands, that's called the stride length. And that length is a really good approximation in a walking gait of the distance from hip to shoulder of the animal that made the track. So if you have a good sense for the size of an elk relative to the size of a large deer or a moose, and you also have something with which to measure that stride length, then you can tease out which animal it was that way. So a long technical answer, but that's how I would do it.
Those are really good tips. Thank you, Joseph.
Sorry, Kayla, I just want to butt in quickly because,
yeah.
Joseph, I feel I have to apologize because I think in my presentation I referred to you as Jason, and I actually don't know why I did that, but I just want to apologize for that. Just throw it out there. I'm sorry.
No,
I was
no worries.
wondering if it was an inside joke. I was like,
well,
not in on here.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but we'll just chalk it up to the virtual format.
A lot of J names. It's okay.
Yeah. I'm very sorry about that.
No worries.
Do either of you use a special measuring tool to measure tracks? Something other than a ruler, or is a ruler usually, does that do the trick?
For me, I like to carry a little, it's a photographic scale that I ordered online. So it's that black and white ruler that showed up in a lot of the photos. I use that because it helps to balance the contrast in snow when you're taking pictures. So that's what I carry. I bought 50 of them online, and so I'm never short of one. There's one in every pocket of every pants that I own. And then the other thing I always carry is just a small, like, carpenter's tape that can retract. And I use that for photos. I use that for measuring stride lengths and trail widths if I want to collect that sort of information, or if I want to compare it to what's in a field guide. And then I also use it for teaching because it allows me to point at things in the track without getting too close and messing up the track with my feet.
Good point. And Jordan, please do feel free to jump in as well if you have any follow-up thoughts to these questions. Question for both of you, really. When is the best time, do you think, to go looking for tracks? Right after a snowfall or a day or two after?
I'm happy to answer this one again, Jordan, if that's okay with you. It depends. So it depends on your purpose. If you're trying to collect tracking data for estimating abundance, you want to wait a while so that tracks have a chance to accumulate. Otherwise, you're walking a long way and you're not seeing any tracks because you just haven't given the animals enough time to make tracks for you to count and see. So typically we say, and this was done in my early work with the ABMI actually, back when they were using track counts, they said, we decided that it was best to wait at least 3 days to allow tracks to accumulate. And that gave you the most opportunity to encounter some of those rare species that we wanted to get in our track surveys, like caribou and wolverine. If you went sooner than that, then those animals just didn't have enough time to make tracks for you to find. And because they're so rare and at low density, you needed a lot of tracks to maximize your chance of actually crossing one. On the other hand, for myself personally, I like to go right after a snowfall. And that's because I just like to see the fresh tracks. And it gives me the more opportunity to hope maybe even see the animal that's making the tracks. And that's really, really helpful. because if you go right after a snowfall and you cross a track, you know that track was made really, really fresh. And so, yeah, so then that's just gives you the more opportunity to potentially see the animal. So.
Very cool. Last question for you, Joseph. Do bucks tend to drag feet more than does?
Yeah, I think that's true. But you can only count on that at a certain time of year. So the bucks tend to drag their feet when they are leaving scent marks. So, and that typically happens in the pre-rut and during the rut and for a little while post-rut. But you can't count on that happening so much in the rest of the year. So rut for deer in Alberta and Saskatchewan starts in about November. So by January, that's not something you can really count on. If you're trying to determine gender from an ungulate, so somebody in the deer family, probably the most reliable way is to get a look at both one of the front feet, tracks of one of the front feet and tracks of one of the hind feet. In a male ungulate, the front feet are going to be much, much larger than the hind feet. And that's just because the male ungulate carries so much weight forward in its body that front track registers really big. It's carrying a lot of weight. The hind doesn't carry that much weight. And so the difference, it's the ratio, basically, the relative size of those two prints. A doe, the prints are going to be, the front will still be bigger, but they won't be dramatically bigger than the hind feet.
Thank you. Jordan, question for you. In your presentation, about midway through, you had a picture of a hand next to a really big track. Was that a wolf track?
Yes, yeah, that was a wolf track.
Very cool. Where was that?
I will have to look that up, but it was from, as Joseph alluded to, the ABMI used to do a lot of tracking surveys throughout the winter. And so I'd have to look up where that image came from, but that was from our old training materials for the field technicians.
Awesome. Well, Jordan, we just really appreciate your insight, and I think everyone here really, really appreciated your knowledge and is motivated to get out there this winter and contribute to citizen science. So I'd like to thank Joseph and Jordan again for all of their insight and expertise. The Nature Conservancy of Canada offers many opportunities for you to get outside, explore nature, and undertake the activity discussed today. One opportunity is our Nature Destinations program. That offers everything from short boardwalk strolls to day-long hikes. In Saskatchewan, we'll actually be announcing our newest Nature Destinations property in the new year. It's located near Asquith, approximately 45 minutes from Saskatoon. And I know Alberta also has nature destination properties near urban centers. So do feel free to visit naturedestinations.ca or reach out to your local NCC staff for up-to-date information and to plan your next adventure. So if you have any additional questions or comments regarding today's webinar or would like to connect with NCC, you can reach out directly to Hannah or myself. For future webinars and events in your area, check out our event page at our website here on the screen. And if you want to add a /events at the end, that'll take you right to the event page. And it's also here that you can sign up to receive emails and to stay up to date about our events. So as I mentioned earlier, in the next day or two, we will be sending you a follow-up email with additional tracking resources and a link to a survey. Short survey, I promise. We would very much appreciate if you filled out this survey and let us know what you thought of tonight's webinar, as well as to let us know what topics you would like to see in the future. In this survey, you will also have the chance to let us know if you would like to be signed up for the newsletter, and everyone that signs up for the newsletter will be entered to win a prize pack. So again, on the behalf of the Nature Conservancy of Canada, thank you again for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. Happy holiday season. Stay safe. And until next time, happy tracking. Take care, everyone. Have a good night.